Well, it's not every day you have the opportunity to purchase a Dumble amplifier previously owned by John Mayer, but that is exactly what has been posted to Reverb 3 days ago at the time of me making this video for you guys. It's a 1990s Dumble Overdrive Special, 50 watts with the serial number 112 for $210,000. Yeah. These amps obviously go for absolutely insane amounts for money, but it's really cool to actually see one of these amplifiers posted, and of course the American Connection, I had to make a video on it. But straight away, I just have to comment on how great I think the amp looks. I love the actual specs of the amplifier in terms of its aesthetics, like the beige tan-ish Tolex reminds me of my Fawn 2203 Marshall, and then even the brown grill cloth looks really great, and then the diamond cloth for the cab as well. It's just a really sweet looking amplifier, I think. And just reading from the description for you guys here before we dive into this just a little bit more about this listing, this Dumble Overdrive Special 50 watt head serial number 0112 was made by Howard Alexander Dumble in the 1990s. It is a fantastic example embodying all of the attributes and sonic qualities that made and continue to make these amplifiers extremely sought after by collectors and professional players. Along those lines, it is no surprise that this amplifier and cabinet belonged to John Mayer for several years, seeing both stage and studio use. This amplifier and cabinet also appear in one of the few rare photos of Alexander Dumble poised with two other Dumble amplifiers in Jackson Browne's Abbey property taken by Michael Doyle. The front control layout consists of FET and normal inputs, a volume control, 3 switches for bright, deep, and rock and jazz settings, treble, middle, and bass controls, a level and ratio for the overdrive section, and a master and presence control for the output. The faceplate reads Overdrive Special by Dumble in white, and on the back of the amplifier there is an effects loop labeled send and return, switches for manual or pedal control over the overdrive and boost functions, 2 speaker outs, 8 and 4 ohms, along with the standard mains on and off and standby switches. This Dumble Overdrive Special 50 watt head is accompanied by an original Dumble 112 closed back speaker cabinet containing an EVM12 8 ohm speaker. The cabinet has blonde Tolex covering as well. It supports a black diamond grill cloth complementing the head both stylistically and sonically. In addition to being celebrity owned and used piece, this highly collectible and sought after example has a rich, punchy, and complex clean sound along with a very focused, tight overdrive capable of extensive range from warm, smoothly blues low gain to searing high gain leads. $210,000 or best offer, $500 flat rate for the shipping it looks like. Really cool just to see one of these amplifiers listed and just kind of, just obviously documented in a little bit of detail. So first up, I'll throw up the photo that the listing refers to of Dumble with a few of the amplifiers that was taken by Michael Doyle. You see all of these different amplifiers there, and then the one in this listing is in this shot, which is just a really, cool and rare shot of Dumble with his amplifiers. And then to actually have this one in that shot, it just makes for, in my opinion, to be a little bit more of a cooler piece of history just because it's one of the few times we see him with his amplifiers, and this is one of them. So that is really, really cool to see, and just a obviously very, very iconic photo in just amplifier history. But of course, as this is primarily a John Mayer gear focused channel, let's get back to that John Mayer connection. So just reading again, it says, it is no surprise that this amplifier and cabinet belonged to John Mayer for several years, seeing both stage and studio use. So I wonder when exactly John would have owned this amplifier, because it just makes me curious. That's where my mind instantly goes as to, okay, what time frame did he possess this amplifier? Did he actually own it? When was it then sold from him to its next owner, if this is the owner that bought it off of John? Or did it change hands a couple of times between the time that John owned it till now, and then now it's up for sale again? The amount of Dumbles that John owns that we have no idea he has, I'm sure there is quite a lot. I think of the photo that he posted where he's on a private jet. He's got the one Dumble and kind of like the wooden enclosure, posting that light flex photo with that Dumble. That was the only time we've ever seen him with it. We get this one really cool photo of him with the amplifier on the jet and then never seen again. So that's just one other example of a Dumble that John had owned that if he never had posted that photo, we would have no idea it maybe even existed or was at least his. So I'm not surprised to see a Dumble come up that has a Mayer connection that I've never personally seen John with before. I know the listing does mention stage use. I don't remember ever seeing any footage of John with this specific amplifier, but it's totally possible he did use it on stage at some point. And especially like the early 2000s, not a lot of great footage does exist. So it's totally possible John did use this on stage for some, shows or whatever. And there's just not a lot of great documentation around it, or at least that I can find, but definitely, not primary stage use for like his main overdrive special. Because I'm just thinking of the ODSs that I've seen John with throughout the years. There was the first one, 2003, going on into the Heavier Things era. There was one of the combo ODSs he used for John Mayer Blues, and he's owned at least two of them at the same time. There's actually a photo that exists where there's two combo ODSs side by side in a rig that never actually came to fruition for live use. I believe it was just for like rehearsals and stuff. It was experimented with at some point. There were then at least two for the Continuum era, whether or not one of them is the same from like 2003 in the John Mayer Trio era. Like a lot of them kind of look the same, right? So there are a few that John used at that point as well, one of which now is owned by my friend Jesse at Jesse's Guitar Lounge, and trade for one of his other Dumbles with John for this one. And then there's the 50-watt silver face one that we've seen him use on the John Mayer Solo, Dead & Company. That's kind of his favorite go-to Dumble. It certainly appears to be right now, just in general. But those are off the top of my head, besides the one on the private jet, the ODSs that I remember seeing John with. So it's just really cool to now see a new one that was also owned and used by him. And even for studio use as well, I mean, I'm sure there are quite a few Dumbles that John owns that he's used in the studio, or even just exclusively for studio use, that we've never really seen him use live, even just for tracks here and there. So it's not surprising to me at all that this amplifier was owned by John for a handful of years and used. I think just, I'm sure as he curates his collection a little bit, he goes through and, kind of sorts out, okay, what am I really using? What am I not? Does he need, multiples? And Keith Urban has stated, I think he was the one to say that John owns like 14 Dumbles quite a few years ago. At this point, he mentioned, he's got a lot of them that, kind of obviously, saying that like, you don't see him with a lot of them, but he does own quite a few of them. And speaking of Keith Urban, that actually reminds me, there is another ODS that John had owned and sold to Keith as Keith's very first Dumble ever. And there's this funny story of how Keith was like, I don't understand how you could spend that much money on an amplifier. And then when John kind of made him realize, well, if you spent that kind of money on one of your guitars, and Keith had, why wouldn't you spend that kind of money on the thing that helps to make that guitar's sound come to life? Basically, is like the gist of the story. And so Keith ended up buying one of John's Dumbles that he didn't really use that often off of him, being this one. And I don't remember ever seeing John with it. So if it wasn't for the Keith Urban connection, this could be another Dumble that was just in the vault of John's that we never knew he had.
The pair of Dumbles you have sitting here first.
This Dumble head he actually got first. He bought this off another a peer of his, and it's amazing sounding amp, and it just it's not, how Dumbles are so specific. Each one, they were made for whoever the original consumer was, was voiced for them. This one was voiced for something with a little bit more bottom end, which is not really his. Don't get me wrong, it's a great amp, but it's not. So then that brings us to the search for, and eventually he acquired this one.
But anyways, because this amplifier is a part of Mayer's gear history, I just had to make a video documenting it because who knows where it'll go once it actually sells, if it goes into someone's collection and won't be seen for another 10 years or something like that, not to be heard. It's one thing I do appreciate about guys like Keith Urban, Bonamassa, John Mayer. They actually bring these amplifiers out and let everyone play them instead of them just sitting in someone's collection gathering dust. So hopefully this amplifier gets, some live use and we get to see where it goes and see the new music that it's a part of and that it creates. Yeah, I just appreciate though that the listing kind of documents it, and even the great photography and everything. It's just cool. It always just makes me so curious, especially when it comes to Dumbles, to just see, okay, here's another one that John owned that we just, there's not a lot of great documentation on until now and stuff like that. So really cool, really awesome amplifier. I do just theorize that it was probably the early 2000s that John had and kind of used the amplifier, because those times, it's not like everyone had an iPhone in their pocket to actually record footage on stage. Not everyone was taking photos and really great clear photos like you can now, where it's like any show John would play at, you can pretty much always get a great shot of it. Very least the amplifier rig. The pedal board, is a lot more difficult, but you'll almost always see the amplifiers that he's using. But the early 2000s especially, you didn't get that. So that's at least where I theorize John probably had used this amplifier. I could totally be wrong, but that's just kind of where my mind goes. And if you owned it for a handful of years, probably used it in some of the records, obviously on some tracks as well, relying on all the various amplifiers, because they all, even though he has multiple ODSs, they all have just these different characteristics, as Dumble really built them for the person who purchased them and designed the amplifier for the player. So that's why I assume as well John purchases different Dumbles, gets to know their characteristics, which ones work really well for him, which ones don't work as well for him, and then that's why they kind of get moved on from his collection as well. Anyways, you guys, hope you enjoyed this video documenting this Dumble amplifier, part of John Mayer gear history. Really, really cool. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you on the next video.